glad to have everyone here for our annual evening of inspiration that Rabbi Light classically gives. Rabbi Light actually gives a class every Tuesday right here. Some of you are regulars, and you can tell those who are not yet regulars how to become regulars. But you're in for a special treat. I actually just drove back, straight back from the Hyatt Regency in Miami just now. Wow. And I heard Senator Lieberman speak and Rabbi Rubenstein. So I'll share with you one quick thought and then we'll let Rabbi Light get on with his show, with his evening of inspiration. So one of them says the following story. They said, I went to a coffee shop, and Jewish guy, he sits down, he gets himself an iced coffee or iced latte, and someone comes over, he's a real anti-Semite, and he starts in with him. And he gives him a nudge with the elbow, and says, that's for Hamas. Then he gives him a kick, and he says, that's for Syria. And he beats him up, and he gives him a punch, and so on and so forth. So finally, after a few minutes, the guy gets up and he leaves. And he figures, oh, I got that Jewish fellow. He sits down, he takes his newspaper, he takes his seat, he takes his iced coffee. 10 minutes later, the Jewish guy comes back. He gives him a whack on the head with a big wrench. He goes, what was that for? He says, that's from Home Depot. Thankfully, Mr. Home Depot is actually a friend and a supporter of the JEC programs. He's actually come and spoken to our college students. We have many different programs of education. Some of you have joined us for the high holidays in the explanatory program. Actually, we've been asked by Glenn and others every year to have that program continue. We're going to have that program in English explanatory every Shabbos, every Saturday, 10 to 11:15. Myself and Rabbi Goldstein in the back, who runs our college campus programming. That will be starting right after the holiday of Sukkot, of Sukkot. Is God dead? I guess Rabbi Light is here to tell you the secret.
Good evening, everybody. The wrench was a perfect segue. Jewish guy was bringing his non-Jewish friend to hear a lecture from a rabbi. And the non-Jewish friend says, do me a favor. Can you please tell me what's going on? This is something that I might not be accustomed to. Please fill me in. So they get to the lecture, and the rabbi walks in. As he walks in, he kisses the ark. The Jewish guy explains. He was kissing it as an expression of respect. The rabbi gets up to the bima, the podium. He says, Shalom. The Jewish guy explains to his friend, Shalom means hello, or how are you? And then the rabbi does this. What does that mean? Absolutely nothing. I'll try to keep it to as much towards official time as possible without getting into Jewish time. The topic is God dead? I have to get into what atheism is, what does it mean to believe, what does it mean to have faith, what does it mean to have knowledge. Before we fully begin, we should probably turn on the AC. Thank you, Robert. Is it on full blast?
It wasn't on. Now it is.
Okay. A young man named Jerry was a staunch atheist his whole life. It's a true story. And he would love to go hiking though, and as he was outside, he was always in awe of the beautiful nature, the trees, the animals, hearing the chirping of the birds, hearing the AC. It was a beautiful experience. He would love to do it every so often. All the accidents of nature. One Sunday morning he's walking and he hears a growl. He turns around, doesn't see anything. He continues along his way, and then he hears something else. He turns around, he sees about 15 feet away is a massive grizzly bear. Looks very hungry. So Jerry starts running for his life, and the bear starts chasing after him. And he's trying to go quicker and faster. The bear's approaching and getting closer and closer. Within about 3 feet, he trips on a stone. He falls down flat on his face. He turns over, and there he sees the bear. The bear has one claw on his shoulder, one claw up in there, about to rip his head off. And he yells out, "God, please save me!" Right then, everything freezes. The bear is frozen. The water that was running is no longer moving. The birds are no longer chirping. Silence. And he hears the voice of God, which sounds very similar to his cell phone going beep. God says, "What can I do for you? Please, God, save me." Sure. But you realize you've denied me your entire life. You're walking around telling people I don't exist. That's a chutzpah. Why should I save you? So he thinks for a second, he's contemplating, maybe he'll tell God, I'll become religious. He was always very intellectually honest. He said, I can't do that. I can't change my way of life now. I can't be a hypocrite. But I pray God, please make the bear religious. So everything gets back to normal. At that point, the bear has one claw up, but instead he puts both paws together and says, "Dear Lord, thank you for the food I'm about to receive." The goal, though, tonight is not just to tell jokes, a couple other ones here and there. The goal is to explore some of the rational underpinnings behind our belief. Why do we believe in God? Are there any atheists in the crowd?
They're not going to tell you that.
Yes?
I'm a devout man. So I'm here to listen to you, not talk, so.
Nice to have at least one atheist. I look forward to talking more maybe after the lecture. There are two options in life. When we think of the big question, is there a creator? And we'll try to stick with the word creator, it's more neutral. God has a little bit of a strange connotation. It's been trampled on for centuries. In our minds, sometimes it's childish or strange or foreign or Christian or some other religion. So we'll say the creator. There are two options. Either there is a creator of the universe, and therefore there's a plan, there's a purpose for creation, there's intelligent design, and we're here with a mission. What we do makes a difference. In that world where there's intelligent design, then there's the notion of right and wrong. You could do something that's true, that's going along with what you're here to accomplish, and that may be called the right thing to do. You could also do that which is not true, which is the wrong thing to do. That's in the world of assuming there is a creator. In the world where we assume there is no creator, and life is one elegant accident, random coincidences. So that means everything we do, objectively speaking, means nothing. If you prefer chocolate ice cream, I prefer vanilla ice cream, that's okay. If you enjoy murder, pillage, rape, and manipulation and abuse, I don't do that, but to each his own. That might not be beneficial for society, but there's no such thing as objective right and objective wrong. These are the two options. Einstein probably put it the best. He says that there are only two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle. The other is as though everything is a miracle. We have those two options before us. To define the terms, if one claims to be an atheist, that comes from the Latin a-theos, without God. That means I believe there is no creator, there is no intelligent design, there is no intent in creation. Agnostic is one who says, I'm not sure, I don't know. That comes from the Greek. Agnostic is not known. I'm not quite sure. What do you call someone who's agnostic, who's also an insomniac and dyslexic? He stays up all night wondering, is there really a dog? Why is atheism irrational? Irrational. What would you say? Can you prove the non-existence of something? Can you prove the non-existence of something?
No. Can I say one quick thing? Very little.
What's that?
I don't think that it's saying that God doesn't exist. I think it's saying because there's no physical evidence, why not? It's not saying, it's not denying anything. It's saying, it's like saying like, I don't have an apple. Atheism is, well, I don't have a belief in God, but it's not saying that God doesn't exist.
So I think the classic atheist is a-theos.
Lack of, A is lack of, or without a belief, not without knowledge or anything.
So it might be semantics. But to define the terms, if one claims to be an atheist, and his definition of that is, I feel there is no God. If that's your approach, why is that belief totally irrational? Because you can't prove the non-existence of something. The universe is a pretty big place. We haven't been to most of the planets and galaxies in the universe. NASA is now saying, hopefully by the year 2030, we might get a man on Mars. In the scope of the universe, that is worthless. There's so much we haven't seen. So to claim with confidence, there is no creator, there's nothing beyond time and space, there's no designer, that's irrational. You can't prove that. To say, I don't know, and I'm tormented by it, I don't know. A rational, logical human being can take that position. Now, what's your name, by the way?
Chaim?
Chaim. Now, Chaim is not defining himself as the, let's say, radical atheist, but there are people in the world that do define themselves as, I am radically atheist, which means I feel confidence there is no creator. So it's really irrational. How do you have sometimes pretty smart people taking that position? I think there are three answers for why anyone could convince him or herself that I know that there's no God. Three potential answers. The first answer really comes with a question, like all good Jewish answers. By a show of hands, have you ever met an atheist who claims to know there is no God, who's a pretty humble guy?
Humble?
Humble. Why not? I've been in many crowds before asking this exact same question. I've never had a hand go up where someone says, I know someone who claims they know there's no creator of the universe, but they're fairly humble, down-to-earth people. Because that mindset, that philosophy, is the greatest expression of arrogance humanly possible. To say, little finite me, I know nothing about anything in the universe. To claim with authority, there is no creator, that's stupidity. And the only way to say that is coming from a deep-rooted sense of real arrogance. Not to say you won't find religious people who are very arrogant as well. We have everyone. But to be that radically atheist, you have to be. I think that's one reason why people are able to fool themselves into that belief system. I think a second reason is the God that they're picturing is very hard to believe in. give you an example. If someone were to ask me, Rabbi, do you believe in the tooth fairy? I would say no. So they can ask me the same question that I pose to the atheist. But you can't prove there's no tooth fairy. Have you been everywhere in the universe? Maybe they live somewhere in the dark side of Saturn. How do you know there's no tooth fairy? I would answer, I don't know many things for sure, but I feel pretty confident that a tooth fairy is made up. It's mythology. It's a fantasy. And I'm willing to say there's no such thing as the tooth fairy. So if as you're growing up, based on your religious experience, based on going to temple or to church or whatever it was, God was painted in a way where he's a jealous, angry, spiteful, wrathful, genocide, you name it, I'm okay, respect me or I'll kill you. If that's the God that was painted for you, so then just like I feel comfortable saying, I don't believe in the tooth fairy, you could feel comfortable saying, I don't believe in God. So that's number two as to why someone potentially could be radically atheist. Because the picture of God that I have is silly. I don't believe in that God. If you're atheist, I'm atheist also. One of my favorite lines that I've probably shared many times before, a young man went to Rabbi Yitzchak of Pedicture, the great Hasidic masters. He said, Rabbi, I have to tell you something, I'm a little bit embarrassed, but I'm having doubts. I don't believe in God. And Rabbi Yitzchak said, don't worry, I don't believe in the same God you don't believe in. I don't believe in the same God you don't believe in. If you have a warped picture of God, it makes sense to deny that particular reality. I think the third reason why one might take the approach of radical atheism is based on ignorance. Rabbi Mechanic is a rabbi that goes around to different schools and speaks about the belief in God and showing logical basis for it. So he tells a story that he went to a high school and he started speaking about God, and one young man in the front raised his hand and he said, Rabbi, I'm an atheist. So he first said, you know what that means? He said, yes, that means I don't believe in God. It's wonderful. The rabbi goes on to ask him, so did you arrive at that based on going through some of the early philosophers, the ancient Greek philosophers, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle? I never read those books. Maybe some of the other philosophers, Spinoza, he was a Jew, I read his stuff. I heard of Spinoza. Maybe Maimonides or Nachmanides or Kant or Schopenhauer. No. The rabbi turns to the kid in a polite way. He said, you're not an atheist, you're an idiot. 3 reasons why one may believe in radical atheism. You look around the world, how many people believe in God? Would you assume the majority of people, the minority of people? So interesting, 2012, Pew Research came out with a study that after doing a survey of 230 countries, their conclusion was 8 out of 10 people in the world believe in the Creator. In America, there's a Gallup poll that goes back to 2011. Slightly less than 90% of Americans believe in God. And I found that hard to believe because I was raised in Los Angeles, and I lived in New York for many years. And South Florida, it's not really Southern America. Until I spent some time in Middle America. And I met people. They're totally different people. They believe in God. They have families and children. So the majority of Americans believe in God. The majority of the world believes in God. What does that mean to believe? To say, I believe, what does that mean? So it may mean absolutely nothing. There are 2 words we could use. Something called faith and something called knowledge. What is the distinction between faith and knowledge? What does faith mean? Faith is, I think this is true. Why? Because I It's not that I chose to think it's true. Why did you choose to think it's true? Because my mother and father told me it was, or I was raised in this particular religion, in this society, in this location, at this time in history. That's what everyone else believed, and therefore I believe that to be true as well. Faith, therefore, is a conviction that something is true, not based on any evidence or logic, but based on circumstance, social setting. That's what faith is. Knowledge is very different. Knowledge is, I think something is true because there's a rationale behind it. There's evidence. There's things that point to that direction. That's knowledge. What is a greater level of achievement? Faith or knowledge? Would anyone say faith? Got a bunch of Jews in the crowd here. We're not so into faith. Faith could be wonderful, theoretically. If I have faith in a loving, kind, charitable God, and He wants me to only do good to others, then that's beautiful. But that same faith that's totally unfounded, unbased, that could lead me to be swept away by the charisma of a Hitler, actually. That could lead me to participate in genocide. If it's not rooted in logic, that can lead you in any direction. It's all based on the emotion. And therefore faith might be nice, but oftentimes it's deadly. So we shy away from faith. Knowledge is the way we try to live our life as much as possible. There are certain things which we will never know. The distinction between faith is the difference between religion and truth. We're not into religion either. We don't like faith, we don't like religion. Faith is for religious people. We're not religious. We're seekers of truth, and therefore we search for knowledge. Does that make sense? Now, sometimes, if you don't have the knowledge, you can make a major mistake. There's a young man who devoted his life to the priesthood, and when he passed away, he went upstairs and he was shown around the heavenly gardens and orchards, and they led the man to the heavenly library. Angels escorted him in, and they told him, we have all the ancient manuscripts, all the original texts are right here. Indulge, enjoy yourself. So he was a holy fellow, and therefore he was in heaven. He grabs a book off the shelf, and he starts reading it with intensity, and he's loving every moment, seeing the original script. And the angels leave him to be, and they hear a scream coming from within the library. Ah! And they quickly fly back in. What's the matter? And the guy has his head on the table. I can't believe it. What's the matter? He starts hitting himself in the head. I can't believe it. They left out the R. There's an R over here. It's celebrate. Takes a while to get that one. It's probably not sure. To explore the rationale, the belief in God, I think there are two basic principles. We could be here for hours. We don't want to do that. Two basic principles. The first is things that burst into existence don't do so by themselves. Another way of saying that is, if there is a beginning, there's a beginner. This is logic and philosophy we took place in first grade. That's one principle we'll have to explore how that applies to belief in God. Principle number two is, where you find highly complex, sophisticated systems, designed, they're intricate, then the assumption is there's a design. When something has a function and a role, and it's clearly very complicated, and it seems to serve a purpose, the valid logical extension is there's some intelligence behind that. Intelligence doesn't come from a lack of intelligence. Consciousness doesn't come from nothingness. Design needs design. Those are the two basic principles we'll be exploring. I'd like to start off with the first one, which is the idea that things that have a beginning must have a beginner. If you were to transport yourself back into the year 1857, and you'd be at a table with some of the great minds of science, and you were to suggest that the world came into existence 13.7 billion years ago, how would they view you? Sick. Everyone's sick. Okay, you're sick, you're distorted, you're clearly uneducated. We all know how old is the world, they would have told you. It's been around forever. Going back to the great Greek philosophers, Aristotle and others, they looked around and they were very smart people. They said, listen, conservation of matter and energy, things don't just burst into creation, things don't just disappear. If matter is here, it's always here. And therefore they deduced it always was here, and it always will be. So there was no beginning. Life as we know it, the world, the universe, was always here. That was the assumption of the Greek philosophers. That was the assumption of the scientific community for more than 2,000 years. It's interesting, you'll find in the writings of some of the great rabbis of the 11th century and 12th century, when they speak about the Torah philosophy of the world having a beginning point, they have to be somewhat apologetic. Maimonides will even mention, although others in the scientific world feel that it's been here forever, we have a tradition. It goes back to that first line in the Torah. The first line is, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So we can't go along with that tradition. We have a different tradition. People were apologetic up into the 20th century. At that point in time, Aristotle's view was called into question. Give you a brief history of the Big Bang Theory. I'm paraphrasing from Rabbi Lawrence Kellerman, his book, Permission to Believe. 1913, a young astronomer in Flagstaff, Arizona, Vista Slipher, he was commissioned to look into what they felt was a galaxy that was forming, the birth of a galaxy. And during his research, he found out something very strange. For some reason, those stars were bolting away from Earth at about 700,000 miles per hour. Didn't know what to make of that. He looked into the matter more, and he was able to discover altogether 42 different galaxies, all running away from Earth at very high speeds. Big question mark. What's going on? Meanwhile, in Germany, we have Albert Einstein, who's formulating his theory of general relativity. The first draft comes out in 1916, and the scientific world is in awe. Most of them didn't realize the glitches in Einstein's work, but there were a couple. Most were just basking in the glory of the theory of relativity. There was, though, a Danish mathematician, William de Sitter. William de Sitter and Einstein were actually good buddies. And he tried to work out the flaws in Einstein's math. He came up with the following radical conclusion, which was, if somehow the universe was expanding, then the math would make sense. That would answer all of those gaps. And he had no idea what Slipher was doing in Flagstaff, Arizona. At the same time, Alexander Friedman, Soviet mathematician and professor, he was also analyzing Einstein's work. He had the same questions that de Sitter had, and he came up with the exact same solution. Maybe if we can posit the universe is expanding, that would make sense out of the math. During World War I, both de Sitter and Alexander Friedman had no exposure to Slipher. After the war, they got together, and they said, we have to present our findings to Albert Einstein. They came to him with this proposition, a way to make sense out of his theory, and Einstein was not pleased. There's a quote from Einstein where he says, I have not yet fallen into the hands of the priests. Why would he say that? What does that mean if the universe is expanding? That means there was a big explosion. It's starting from something. We know Newton's laws. Things don't move around unless something external acts upon it. Einstein said, I'm not falling into the hands of the priests yet. In a letter that he later wrote to Dissenter, he said, the circumstance of the expanding universe irritates me. I don't want to believe it. Time goes on. In 1925, Edwin Hubble, an American astronomer in Mount Wilson Observatory in California, through his new telescope, he's able to find not 42 galaxies, but his finding revealed that every galaxy within 100 million light years was expanding away from planet Earth. 100 million light years. How long is one light year? Anybody know? And how far can light travel in 1 year? About 7 trillion miles. So 7 trillion times 100 million is, Alex? It's a big number. It's a big number. They were encouraging Einstein to travel to meet with Hubble and discuss his findings. He was reluctant. For 5 years, he pretty much ignored Hubble. Eventually, he made his famous trip from Berlin to Pasadena, my home turf, and he meets with Hubble. At that point, Einstein says, new observations by Hubble make it appear likely that the general structure of the universe is not static. The universe is not what Aristotle thought it was. It's exploding, it's expanding. Einstein passed away in 1955. 10 years later, we have Robert Wilson and his crew. They were calibrating a super-sensitive microwave detector at Bell Telephone Laboratories in New Jersey, and they heard this strange humming sound. So at first they assumed maybe they're bird droppings. They go outside, they clean up the instrument, they're still hearing that sound. And they said, well, maybe the local radio station is somehow jamming the machine. They do many different things, and they realize no matter what direction they point this thing in, they're getting that same 3K hum. 3K is 3 degrees Kelvin. They were very familiar with the writings of Alexander Friedman in his explanation of Einstein. Alexander Friedman predicted decades earlier that if my explanation is right, to make sense out of the math that Einstein is proposing, you would be able to hear the explosion of the Big Bang. And he says it should be around the 5K hum or so. These scientists, Wilson and his team, discovered the echo of the largest explosion in history, which is now called the Big Bang. For this discovery, they received the Nobel Peace Prize. Fast forwarding now to 1978, Dr. Robert Jastrow, a big name, a big physicist. He also brings many sources to that same conclusion. Fast forward to 1988, Dr. Stephen Hawking of Cambridge University. He writes as follows, many people do not like this idea that time has a beginning, probably because it smacks of divine intervention. Nevertheless, the present evidence suggests that the universe will probably expand forever. One last piece by Robert Jastrow, an article that he has in the New York Times magazine. He writes as follows, this is an exceedingly strange development, unexpected by all but the theologians. They have always accepted the word of the Bible, in the beginning God created heaven and earth. For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. Present theory in all of science is the world, the universe as we know it, did have a starting point. For the same reason Einstein was irritated by that idea is the same reason why any logical human being would take that information and say, there's a beginning, likely there's a beginning. That's one principle. Principle number two is looking at the complexity of the world around us, and really we have A and B. A comes from a verse in Job. where the Tanakh tells us, "Mibusori echza Eloka," from within myself, I can see God. By analyzing the human being, you will be able to see the divine. There are many things we could focus on. We have many people out there that are proficient in all the details of different systems of the body, but you're stuck with me for tonight. I'll share with you a couple of ideas. DNA. DNA was something we knew about since 1869. We knew it existed, but we had no clue what exactly it did. 1953, come along James Watson and Francis Crick, and they discover the system and the function of DNA. They realize that this chain of chemicals in the body is actually a blueprint for everything that makes up your physical body. Your fingerprint is based on the DNA instructions, the color of your eyes, your hair, the size and the weight of every organ of the body. Everything that makes you who you are is based on information that's coded in the DNA. To give a quick background for those who are not as familiar. What is DNA? DNA are small particles made up of what they call nucleotides. Every nucleotide has three different things. It has the phosphate group, it has the sugar group, and it has nitrogen bases. You will be tested. And for those of you who are here to get that discount for the holiday service, unless you get an 80 or above, you're not getting your money back. So you have the sugar group, the phosphate group, and the nitrogen bases. There are 4 nitrogen bases. They're known as A, T, G, C. Now, if you could picture the double helix, which looks like a ladder, you have 2 sides of the ladder, and you have the rungs going across, and then it spins. So the sides of the ladder are the phosphate group or the sugar group, and the rungs that go in between are the 4 nitrogen bases. Crick had the following hypothesis. It wasn't proven at first. Over decades, it's been proven in many, many ways to be accurate. He thought as follows, that the way those nitrogen bases are organized, the sequence in your DNA determines the creation of proteins in the cell. We have trillions and trillions of cells in our body. Those cells function, by and large, on the proteins within the cell. Those proteins are the greatest tools the cell has. How do the proteins form? Where do they come from? They come from a link of little amino acids. And there are 20 varieties of amino acids. So based on the combination of amino acids, that tells this protein what to look like to create a 3-dimensional shape that serves its purpose. So Francis Crick thought as follows. I bet that the structure, the sequence of the nitrogen bases in the DNA molecules, based on that sequence, will determine the sequence of the amino acid that creates the protein. That's protein synthesis. Basically, he was claiming something absurd, that within every cell of your body, you have these microscopic little details of everything in your body. Every cell of those trillions and trillions of cells is a microcosm of the whole you. They've proven that to be true. The average human being has about 3 million rungs or nitrogen bases, and that creates genes. We have about 20,000 genes. Genes are the messengers that tell the amino acids how to form to create the proteins. Mother Nature, what a wonderful woman. She's unbelievable what she can accomplish. Dr. Michael Denton, who is an Australian microbiologist, writes as follows. He says, the capacity of DNA to store information vastly exceeds that of any other known system. It is so efficient that all the information needed to specify an organism as complex as man weighs less than a few thousand millionths of a gram. the information necessary to specify the design of all the species of organisms which have ever existed on the planet could be held in a teaspoon, and there would still be room for all the information ever to be recorded in every book in the world. So you have absolutely nothing that contains all of the information you need as a human being, all of the information of all the species in the world. Little tiny microscopic coding. Those of you who know computers, and I do not know computers, if you want a new function, if you want the computer to do something different that it wasn't able to do before, how do you accomplish that? Instructions, that's called coding. Right now kids are learning about coding in high school. The body works in the exact same way. There's a German biochemist, Bernd Olof Karkas. He says as follows: the problem of the origin of life is clearly basically equivalent to the problem of the origin of biological information. Those people in the scientific field who are exploring the origins of life, it all comes down to one question. Post-DNA, now that we understand the coding of the body, the human genome, it all comes down to that issue. Where did that information come from? How did that happen? How did that complex, elaborate system form itself? That is the question. Richard Dawkins is an outspoken, dripping with arrogance atheist. And he says as follows: the machine code of the genes is uncannily computer-like. The pages of molecular biology journal might be interchanged with those of a computer engineering journal. I could say with conviction there is no designer, but yet the coding of a human being is just like the coding of a computer. Dawkins also says, biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. Huh? You got that one? Biology is the study of complicated things that have the appearance, it looks like they were designed for the purpose, but really we know they weren't. I'm thinking of the Simon and Garfunkel song right now. Man hears what he wants to hear, and disregards the rest. Da 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 da. That's a great song. Bill Gates said that DNA is like a computer code, only much more complex than anything we've been able to devise. So you look at the idea of DNA, you see the complexity, you see the intricate wisdom and design to assume chance, it looks like it was designed for a purpose, but really Mother Nature is fooling us. I think that takes a lot more faith than coming to the conclusion there's probably intelligence behind that. The human brain. Human brain is composed of 100 billion neurons. Now, each neuron will make connections between 10,000 to 15 connections at a time. The connections are called the synapses. So if you do the math, 100 billion neurons making between 10 and 15,000 connections, that means we have 100 quadrillion, that's 10 to the 14th power, 100 quadrillion synapses in the brain. And we can process and do how many things within a second? The brain is able to make 10 to the 16th power operations per second. That's a lot. That's a big number. If you think about everything that's happening as we're sitting here, you're hearing me, if you're not sleeping yet, I'm talking, if I'm not sleeping yet, we're communicating, I'm breathing, I'm not even thinking about breathing, my heart's beating, blood is flowing, my lungs are working, the brain's doing that. It's an amazing thing that nature did. If you think of the eye, baby's eyes develop in the embryo, they begin developing in 19 days post-conception. Once they reach maturity, they'll have more than 12 million screen points per centimeter. The retina, which is the place in the back of the eye that's sensitive to light and receives the images. The retina has more than 50 billion such tiny microscopic points. All these points blend together to see a whole picture. That's the eye. what we've done so far is we've looked into the body. I want to take one step. So again, we have principle number one: if there's a beginning, which science in the 20th century has proven that there's a beginner. Principle number two is, if there's design, there's a designer we saw from within the body, and now we look in the heavens. The verse in Isaiah says, "Sa'u moro meinechem," look up to the sky, "Ura'u," and you'll see, "Mi bara ela." You'll see who created these things. There's been recently many articles on the subject of intelligent design. I'll share with you a couple of lines. This is from the Wall Street Journal, December 25th. I have no time to speak about religion, 2014. And it quotes from the 1966 Time magazine. If you're wondering where I got the name of the lecture from, it comes from 1966, the front cover of Time magazine, which said, "Is God dead?" The article in the Wall Street Journal says, "It turns out the rumors of God's death were premature." More amazing is that the relatively recent case for his existence comes from a surprising place, which is science itself. He gives a couple of examples of what scientists call the fine-tuning within the universe. For example, astrophysicists now know that the values of the four fundamental forces, gravity, electromagnetic force, and the strong and weak nuclear forces, were determined less than 1/1,000,000th of a second after the Big Bang. Alter any one value and the universe cannot exist. For instance, if the ratio between the nuclear strong force and the electromagnetic force had been off by the tiniest fraction of the tiniest fraction, by even one part in one with 17 zeros, no stars would have ever formed. If you think about the atom, the nuclear force in the atom, if it was 2 degrees weaker, no atoms would be anything else but hydrogen. If it was 1 degree stronger, then we would barely have hydrogen. Human life couldn't exist, the universe as we know it couldn't exist, if you tweak something, one of the universal constants, even slightly. That's an amazing coincidence. One more piece I'll share with you from, this is Time magazine, 2014 as well, April 27th, where he speaks about the idea of intelligent design. And he writes, "The deeper we delve into the mysteries of physics and cosmology, the more the universe appears to be intricate and incredibly complex. To explain the quantum mechanical behavior of even one tiny particle requires pages and pages of extremely advanced mathematics. Why are even the tiniest particles of matter so unbelievably complicated? It appears that there is a vast hidden wisdom or structure, a blueprint, that even the most simple-looking elements in nature have deep complexities to them." In the 1800s, there was this assumption in the scientific world that a cell of life is just like plasma. It's just goop, nothing there. Post-Crick DNA discovery, we know there's a lot more than meets the eye. What does the atheist answer to these very simple, very relevant points? What's the response? So Dawkins was asked this question. An interview with Ben Stein. He posed the question to Dawkins, so then how do you think life began? All of its structure and beauty and complexity. Dawkins answers as follows. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they then seeded planets. And our planet was seeded from that other, more advanced civilization. It's a possibility, he says, and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose, listen to these lines carefully. Listen to one who's living in self-deception. I suppose that it's possible you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of design. So even the most radical atheist in the world, when confronted with this very basic information, you can't tell me, well, it just kind of happened that way. Scientists do a calculation that for anything to form, anything close to what we have as a living cell, even with all 13.7 billion years, assuming that every second of those billions of years was focused on trying to create life, the odds of creating anything, 1 in trillions and trillions and trillions. So even the most staunch atheist will have to say, well, there is design, but it probably came from aliens. If that works for you, then more power to you. He's not the first one to say this. Francis Crick himself, who was awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine based on his work in DNA, his work was in 1953. 20 years later, 1973, after realizing that there's no way the complexity of life could just come from random evolution. Now again, we're not saying that evolution is not true. Evolution very well may be very true. What we are saying is random evolution, to assume there's no designer, there's no beginner, there's no intelligence behind the system, that is stupid. That we are saying. Crick realized this, and therefore he suggested, similar to what Dawkins said, maybe there was intelligent life elsewhere, and they germinated our planet. He got a lot of flack for that from the scientific world. Newsweek had an article, others made fun of him. Eventually, he had to take back a lot of the arguments, a lot of the theory. At the end of his life, Crick said, the origin of life appears to be almost a miracle. That's Francis Crick. So where do we go from here? This is what we call knowledge. This makes the most sense. We try to stay far away from faith. If you're going to see the world, and you're going to accept what science has to say, and your conclusion is, wow, it really looks like it has a purpose, but it doesn't, that means you have a lot more faith than I do. If your conclusion is, I guess there's intelligence, I guess there's a mastermind, I guess there's intent and there's purpose, then you sound like a pretty logical fellow. But all this is only step one. We need another hour and a half for step two. Now in step two, the last couple minutes, I'll give you the following example. You were adopted as a child, and in your 20s, you're curious, you want to meet your biological parents. And you find out that your father passed away years ago, but your mother's alive and well, doesn't live that far away. So you do DNA testing, and you find out who your mother is. At this point, you know for sure that this woman is your mother. Do you love her? Do you have a relationship with her? I don't know her. The goal of belief in God, we started off by going through the definitions. Atheism, what it means to be agnostic. What does it mean to believe? The Jewish approach is we have to acquire knowledge, but knowledge is not the end game. Knowledge is only the foundation. We have to first get the DNA results to know that you're my mom. But once you're my mom, it's my job to make a relationship with you. You want to make a relationship with me. You want to connect. How do we make that connection? Once we know there is a creator of the universe, once we know life is not random, life is not by accident, so how do you create a real bond? It's a very hard thing to do. The Torah gives us guidelines. The Torah gives us advice, directions, instructions. The Torah is the DNA of a Jew. You want to thrive. You want to feel satisfied spiritually, emotionally. These are the guidelines. These are the instructions. We believe there's a God because it makes the most sense. But now our job is, how do I create a stronger relationship with the creator of the universe? And the answer is, let's do something more. Let's do something different. If I wasn't lighting Shabbos candles until now, then let me start lighting Shabbos candles. I want to do something extra to bring God into my life, to create an awareness, to create that presence that I'm living with the creator of the universe. Do something more that you did yesterday. As we approach Yom Kippur, that's really what it's all about. We want to do more. We want to grow. We want to make that relationship real. There's a wonderful allegory that's told of a young man who was separated from his parents for years and years. And they tried reaching out to him, and he never answered their calls, never returned the texts. And eventually they stopped. Years go by, and he sends his parents an email. I'll be coming actually this way. I'm taking the Greyhound. I'll be stopping at the bus station Sunday afternoon. I'm supposed to get there around 4:30. I understand if you don't want to see me, and I blame myself. I don't blame you. But if you do want to see me, just so I can be emotionally prepared, can you just put out some kind of sign? If you're standing there, to wear like a little white bow or something that I know you want me to come and rekindle the fire. So the son's in the train, on the bus rather, going back to hopefully meet his parents after many years apart, and he's not sure what to expect. A large part of him assumes they won't be there. That's his own doing. He falls asleep, and then when finally the bus comes to a stop, he opens his eyes and he looks out, and the bus station is decked in white. There's white sheets everywhere. The benches are covered with white sheets, and his mom and dad wearing totally white. White shirts, white pants, and they're waiting for him. That's what Yom Kippur is. We might not have had that relationship in the past. We might not have embraced those mitzvos and those instructions of the Torah. Yom Kippur is a time where Hashem says, it's all white. I'm waiting for you. Come home to me, baby. Give me a hug. I love you. Yom Kippur should be joyful. It should be meaningful. We should all have a wonderful and growthful year. Thank you so much. Questions? You could see me in the kitchen.